You're a bit tired in the afternoon.
Tadi komnan hai minjo le de tsat di ba de komnan hai minjo ngue de kan ye ma isra dewe ne ba chung be ne ba chen bo zo ban je la da te tsas ta zo di wala di karela na sumba kan la zo ba zo bi yudo ta zo ba gomsa ki pe yudo yura 인지 미니 다치 오마인 게다 카르네 chen 카르테 오인 저 참말라 아니 간저 저거 보면 돼. 봐. 다는 어디래 사창 저 처외 동네다 당외 동네다 아니 차바당 참문도 농축 다 동네 강이 뭐 보여라. 아니 롱다 롱소라 다 강이 담을 여라 지금 나와 차이나래 직타만디 버서서 심발라 강이 태 카리네 그래 올라 나와도 돼도 아니 네다는 손나 나체 아니 친와라 딩은 저 당보다 되게 강해. 와, 심지 같이 다자는 그냥 저기 제시 칸라 심지들 타와나 쭉셔다. 좀 진짜다 당셔도 쳐보라. 그저 줘야라 라마요. 대발에 동대 땅. 와, 심지 같이를 배는 거 신가 모두 봐주는데 랑고도 너무 다니지. 내가 그 단도 따다 랑고도 안에 동문데 치기다. 아니 너 소바 당스 다기즈레 미제테스 다기즈레 텐데르들 아니 칼라 먼저 조센 맞잖아 다기라는 소소라 제레라디 지나기들 조센 라지라 조센 미자와 테타 체나 네바페스 타디칼로나 드줄랑 아주 그다 칼로 콜네 네바셔서기 유들 파길라 이제 심제 동요와 망보시도 라 다기제레 미제테들 아니 마가와다들 안 통주로 오드네 아주 지지요 말했으라 대다 제와에는 아니 가나 저 소소라에는 저 shum어라야 네바 페와다 리는 그랬어. 마타기데.
So good afternoon. So this morning we left off looking at the 14th and 15th verse, right, where it says there's nothing whatsoever that does not become easier through familiarization. So through habituating with small harms, I should learn to be patient with greater harms, and so forth. This is where we left off, and so now we're looking at the third outline, actually. At the third outline, where it says, I should not... So this is looking at the objects of patience, right? So the things that we should have patience with, right? And so there are all sorts of objects with respect to which we should have patience. And as we said, there's a wider range of thinking about the different types of things that we should be patient with. So here it gives us some examples. So it says, I should not be impatient with heat and cold, wind and rain, sickness, bondage and beatings, for if I am, the harm they cause me will increase. So here it talks about all these different objects that we should have patience with, because, for example, we have all sorts of suffering associated with these, like being too hot, being too cold, having all this strong wind and rain, and likewise having sickness. In terms of bondage, it's kind of when one's freedom is taken away, right? One is bonded in some way. So, maybe for us not so much, but we can think about various types of animals, animals at a zoo. They don't have the freedom to go out of there, to be freed from there, right? So they don't have that freedom. And then likewise with the beatings, then also we can think about the animals. We see all these donkeys and all different work animals that are, they're beaten quite harshly, so that they will work. So these kind of sufferings as well. So these are the various types of objects that cause us, difficulties, or that cause us, to maybe have aversion or anger. But so we should have patience with them, because again, if we allow this to continue, it just becomes more harmful for us in the future, especially in terms of future lives. That kind of harm will just become greater and greater if we simply allow ourselves to, become angry at such things.
The Dio let's indeed get carting to the corners of it up Chebaladra. Combine any Chitan Gitangi Migi Shiga and Damler, Kangi Cartain, Kashi Done Mobuchiture, Kashi Chituma, Tendero Stenda, Cousin Adela, Lala and Kachi Lavora, Lala Daki Tatum, Suzuki, Mikashi Suzuki Tato, Toina. Ani paden haba cheban Jerusalem the mikashi introduce like is also dalan zigatona dalan zing divigala and suzuki jela chik kunzu pa matu do suzu jela suzu ta da ton ko logo e taba chigda lo kalo da logo chimbo chania panjing to e legi tadi migi semgi and rashin shigaro steng do sa lala da gi ta thona paden haba cheban pa and temboda and hapar be the sensu hale la shi to resra Mikashi Shiga de Kazusana, Lala Genji Tatum, Suzuka Ta Mai, Mishimagi Ta Toma Zambi, Bitkorama, Marido, Jedo, Kashi Shitachura, Kashi Logo Chujura, Kashimbo Dodo di Tangura. Teni Ani di Carrana and Juro Lara, Poji, Jewa, Polana, Tata, Po the Jewa Chiparanta, Pojo Mariva. Roa, the Legin Joy, rest. Teni sending Nata, but I think Anzu, Dindedo di Kashi Betus. Mission bag tat home as a Suzuki tat home in a power chair, the Cassis mission bag tat the mission bag tat on a redo and the Chevage was the Carolina Sengi and Rashi on Sule Rashi can name Tango rest. Dennis Sengi is and 10 tons, the day and Joam Chitangan Joa Maple Chicodra. Ani Hami Sule Joe was the Kanjimaji Karishola and a Digi Kalana. Migi Samutan and Damaris, Kashi Pedicor, Powder, Kashi Belogo Chunju
And so then the next verse, verse and a half, tells us some when they see their own blood become especially brave and steady, but some when they see the blood of others faint and fall unconscious. So these reactions come from the mind being either steady or timid. So what these verse and a half is telling us really is, that people have quite different personalities, right? People have different ways of dealing and reacting to various situations. And so the example given is, when someone's seeing blood, right? So some people, when they see, their own blood, right? So it's kind of more serious. They see their own blood, they become very steady and very brave and strong. Whereas others, not even thinking about seeing one's own blood, but even just seeing someone else's blood, they become really timid and really kind of afraid, and some people even faint from seeing it. So, that kind of ability to handle these kind of situations really comes from the mind, right? It's to do with people's different personalities and different ways of handling things, and so all of that comes from the mind, and it just comes down to people's different personalities. No.
Dile Cindy, Hashikalana, Delestana, di Tesmando, Kalana, Mikaji Dharmalaja, Shichtoira, Hampana de la Chibutampo Namusa, Rangi Rala, Sajanchi Ten, Suzu Mishabag, Sanjaro Nevitsana, Tatuana, Paden Hakajo, Suzu Bow, the temperature race, Lala, and Genji is a Tatuana, Poji Jonjo, Tasa. Teni anis shuroji is ngobo you touching enjoy mar chichungla rally maresra lula ani sanitang lula sani soji is cheba mainchi sempi is nganden batang cheza di lu chichungda ani chik tendela rally mar semba jachele tila tugorela dodo dirshira.
And so we can also think that this type of reaction, right? It doesn't really depend upon someone's body, right? Someone can be very big or they can be very small, but yet that reaction doesn't really depend upon that, right? It really just depends upon the mind and how the mind is reacting to it, right? So someone can be very big and yet still kind of faint and so forth, and someone can be very small and be very brave. So it doesn't so much depend upon the body as it depends upon the mind.
Pati kandilo sanstanga tanda digala pe dal sharamishi chitangi dal panzingala sang di samutaya mara ine ngazo ki kangi chunjuji thethuna khaji padone chi thugure khaji ani kangi chunjuji le zuma tun pe lamsagora chi kalo kangi di pe shuchumbo imbo chogora tira shewora ma de ngazo pashilo la dal ka khati chaya danzinga i ti shewora tanda di pe ro chi shara.
So of course the blood is just being used as an example. It's not that we need to worry about handling seeing blood, but rather it's standing in for any kind of difficulty or obstacle that we might face, such that it's showing us that people are very different in the way that they are able to handle different obstacles and difficulties, and this is something that can start from a very young age, right? That for some people, when they're faced with certain difficulties, they face it head on, whereas some people can have a very difficult time with these kind of things.
Dewe neba chiseba ngane neba deba chuse tangtu ra neba chisebe dunge namji mitsuhi pena ngazo dunge do kangi do karuna adede khe mara san so ba nami do tangtu chisu chura tene ji tangtu wa ina ani da dinde tu ba chigu res la ra dunge namji mitsushin mitsu chele digala so dunge di so la kalo kangi nyoma boya chin adi ke marin pa te zulhyan ro tang re stang che le kusi ro ra ani kebe dunge chuya ne senji retang nyome cha se mi keba de ka nam je chamba de ka na shulu ge dunge kan de jung ba ine ya ti su su ge sembala ani kangi ma so ba nyopo ma so ra sembala kangi ma so chen te pa lya chen sha du res kan de dunge ka ni o de yung su ge ma ta ba re Chutaji chi la chi tere zamza pengir zamza nu chi tene yungur lan petis phen ro tanto na so kangi khare na di shira kangi nyongo mares.
So then the next verse, the next two halves of the verse tell us in summary, right, that therefore I should disregard harm and not be affected by suffering, for even when the wise are suffering their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. And so what this is telling us, that therefore, what we should strive for is to also have this attitude towards the various types of suffering and obstacles that we face, to kind of have, not be kind of overcome by them, but rather develop a very spacious mind that is, kind of think, oh, it doesn't really matter, no worries, it doesn't really matter, not letting our mind kind of be deflated in this way by the various obstacles that we are encountering. And so it says that these wise ones, or people, those who are skilled in these kind of ways, then again they can keep their mind unobstructed by these various difficulties. And so this is kind of achieved if we are able to keep in mind, how these things are impermanent and they come and go. And likewise, sometimes these things, are things that we do are helpful, sometimes they're unhelpful, and that things change. And so keeping all these things in one's mind with respect to one's suffering and difficulties, one can keep this more relaxed attitude towards our obstacles and so forth.
Tadi ola di kala na nyumo pawala baby pen kasi nganzo nyumo shi ta nyumo je una te ba pawala benzu chewa ina ti pen do career le dra sa ji tinde inza nyumo na da ra nyumo na da yunji la la nyumo la de so nyumo je da ani te le yunji ba la de chita nganzo yunji ba le ma je da tinde da ko da yunji ba ji yunji chena ne ba ma ta nganzo ji ge ji nyumo da ka ma chita kanlos na nganzo ji mi ji le ba ma jawan ne ba mambole gora ine dunge thang chi chese ne ta dine gi chi dunge kare na te ke ma la ne ndo tang wa ina ra ani shedang la so dan jong ba te di su gi shedang gi do ju ro te shedang de do lo peshar ani mi le do di ani ba jong tu gore su gi na gi da ju ro ta ni mo de che a ta te ke ma pa sha wa ina su gi do de ma jong tu gore es te da 대기 소소기 다우디 마좀 투니기 미지 빠우주라 와 덴데기 빠우디 대다 제치 빠우데레디 덴데기 소소기 뇽모기 다들마 카티짜니야 제가 타기 와 제가 타기디 아니 빠울라 그래스라 아니 하마롤스 빠울디 디 마인케기 아니 파기레 뇽모지 제고르 디 뇽모들야 마조이 빠네 징 마가와다 셰당로 소바체 덴데오디 카르스나 숨지마 시사지고 롤에 앉았어야 되바 마시 그 된다 미주로 지레스.
So then the next verse, the next section, the benefits of striving to abandon the afflictions. This is talking about how, when we have the various types of afflictions in our mind, then striving to abandon those in various ways and the benefits of doing this. So it says, when war is being waged against the afflictions, much harm is caused at the time of battle. The victorious heroes are those who, having disregarded all suffering, destroy the enemy of anger and so forth. The others slay only corpses. right? And so here, in terms of our practice, trying to deal with and overcome the various types of mental afflictions, it's being likened to a war, right? Engaging in war against an enemy. However, here the enemy, the main enemy, should be seen as our own mental afflictions, such as anger, not something that is coming from the outside. But this is not usually the way that we see things, right? We think about fighting with things from the outside, like all these obstacles and enemies and things like that. And so we engage in battle with them as opposed to battling the real enemy, which is anger and so forth. So it says that the real enemy is the one who's able to overcome that. The real hero is the one that is able to overcome that enemy, the internal enemy. Whereas, if it's not about just defeating that enemy, if one is simply trying to defeat all these external enemies, then it's just like, slaying a corpse. Meaning, you're trying to kill something that it's already dead. It's not going to be much use.
Kuzuma je chikchile se yada ani saja choya de chichuna ko power lo ni tikeda do zero that is the santa no that is kuparo santa ma heji do ra and the choya ko this koran thota je theje chunjong chi de ro so wora cheza de le pesha wa za de ne insa suzugi ma di pha manjin chin suzugi dadi ma chongwa ina te ngone paw ngone de resra se de le na de ji ngya da chewa shima la ina dunge ma do ya da then Pawone did it, Suzuki Dutch on to Malo in Mobita. Shulu did it, Masin and Machidishura. Then I was that Jacoshimbala Mado and the Chida. Immediately say to Mambuchore, near Milkangi Mambusore, and I put to say to Majina, Machichido, called Road that Sejo, Digana, de Tomara.
So, this example is kind of showing that, previously in kind of older times, and you would have all these kings and their retinue, and you would go into war with other kingdoms and things like that, and then the victorious ones would be considered the heroes, right, of the battle, and they would be considered the heroic people in this. But when we really think about it in a modern way, then that kind of seems a bit silly, right? That you're just engaging in killing all these people, and that makes you a hero. So again, this is saying that when we seeking to defeat or destroy all these kind of external enemies, we're not really accomplishing much, right? Because whether you kill this person or you don't, they're going to die anyway, right? So one day. So it's not really accomplishing much when you really think about it, and certainly not much to be thought a hero about. Whereas the real hero is someone who is able to defeat their internal enemies, such as anger, because again that creates the real benefit both for this life and the next.
Chitangi dunge sen de so nyangu de kangi de res ne dunge de la sanon tangwaina ane ngazo le phento khare la na ra so le dunge chi chongwaina namdi mi khaje ngaje chmoyra nga ma to me san zami mi khaje de yorwa tinde ko la kangi de chongwaina khorangi cho tinde ki ta chona ngaje kalor so dunge liwaina cho ye theba la de gala so 다 dunge ji yudu gala anta nga ngune shuri mendusra susu ngaje da theba zuma nyudro serwala de me ba chatu resra dunge no mena ani nga ma to zamni na nga ma to me samra ra chi shi yende na pawo ina ta jipen jo ina nga ngara ra hi samde ge mila khalo da ngaje da popala chi chulira o dinde ro samde de ani susu gi chikangi do te de dunge ji yudu gala ani de theba de khali ma nyom do diya dunge gi phen to ra ne khwapala hije dende we dunge gi ani nyom de be khwapala ngazo dunge nyom de hije ji gi resra 아니 근데 이나 아니 딜라 가시기 코아파데 베 히제로 주르스타 가르라나 딜라 ngazo ge kana hije go bata taten 코아파라 hije go ata ani ngazo ge dibalan zim go bata gewala ga go ra dipe gi le pan zim papang wa che bata ani gewele dubala tende gi phendo yures
so then
jo thaimda tikida
And so then the fifth section is explaining the benefits of suffering, or benefits of these difficulties, right? So of course, in general we think about suffering and obstacles as being something that we don't want. There's something that are harmful towards us. But if we really kind of think about it, they also have their good side. They also have their benefits if we kind of think about them properly. And so it says, furthermore, suffering has good qualities. Arrogance is dispelled due to disheartenment. Compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. Negativities are avoided, and joy is found in virtue. Right? So the second line talking about arrogance or pride, right? So it's often the case that, if someone doesn't really face any difficulties and doesn't have any obstacles to anything, it's very easy to start thinking a lot of yourself, right? Oh, I'm the best, I'm doing so well, and so on and so forth, to become very full of oneself. So it can be kind of very helpful in a way to encounter difficulties, to encounter obstacles that will thereby deflate our pride, right? They will counteract this idea that, everything goes my way and everything is good and I'm the best, and all these kind of ways of thinking can be overcome by experiencing these sufferings. So in that way, they can be quite positive. And likewise, by understanding suffering, we can generate compassion for those in samsara, those who are also experiencing suffering within samsara. Likewise, negativities, the causes of these sufferings, are avoided, and joy is found in virtue, in the causes of happiness.
Zuba Gonpa la ni si jeba sheba da tuan do wo tambo jeba sheba la sum thoa dang thoa jin so jula sa ra le be rangwa chen ma yin ba tang rangwa chen ji is ju yu ba ga ba tang so thoa do bi is go ba wo tambo la thoa dang so thoa chen so jula ra le ba tang wa chen ni be ni so thoa dang thoa chen de de ma sa chi de shi ra ni ma ma ro ndi sa ra do do shen ni ra 아니 다들라들도 녀모 첸지 있어 녀모 첸지 제와라 초아머리 받대미 진세 와 당가족이 지당에 녀모라디 잠자 지간저 칼로 마부지로 코야 당당가족 티반나 잘라 소반나 센다머리라 테 녀모데 리고다라 대변에 변도 샤와나 아니 티발라 소 동해치 있으라 윤에 첼라 모토와 당가서 인지미지 컨트롤한스데 갈라니 미치기치를 네버로치나 아졸롱랑도 봐 내가 다시 가지서 도망가라 엔데 시선이 미치랑 아졸롱랑 거래서 그냥 엔데 계시 엔데 농랑거나 그냥 나상아 티반 나살라이죠 봐 티반 나살다지 까만나야 가르나 그냥 디 나살다 쳤롱랑도 니에 디에 치파레스 디 나살디에 가즈나 주다 첸다 드니지를 때는 중고레스 봐 다단다 쳐놓을 콘도 사니기 다시 도마 수이네 코란즈에 치 주다 첸지를 때는 컨트롤랑 거 Tinde kansatala chope control saidus tiki dungete jitila ra nasala super chitiba dangona zugi nasaki chura dungete wada chudi lunglangi midas tini cheba karela
and so so then the next section, right, is dealing with the second type of patience, practicing the patience of being certain in the Dharma, right? And so there are all these various outlines that you can read for yourself. And so the first one at the end is talking about the reason it is unsuitable to get angry with afflicted beings. So it says, just as I do not become angry with the great sources of suffering such as jaundice, then why be angry with sentient beings? They too are provoked by conditions. Right? So usually we get angry at others because, we say, oh, Tashi did this and this to me, or Droma did this and this to me, and right? So due to various things that they do to us to make us suffer or give us obstacles in some way, we get angry with them, right? But they are kind of that the reason they did X, Y, and Z is because of certain causes and conditions that led them to do that. So in the same way, why do we not get angry with various types of sicknesses that we have? So jaundice here is just being used as an example. There are many different types of sickness. But just like the person is a certain set of causes and condition that causes us suffering, then something like a sickness is kind of very similar, right? It also arises due to a variety of causes and conditions and causes us suffering. So why do we get angry with the person, the people who are causing us suffering, but we don't get angry at sickness, right?
Kazana tibala so dunge chisa juwe chela motowa tinzu control da tikasa tibada de las navala so bala che motowa sewe na la chete to the senda denge ke kansa de che kachin troge yela na tiwa chik tangora teta konja chenji kula ta pejin tonda dosa sura de sama konzo jijen da tene control ya de de chin de bores pena anem pena mende jen de yas 소소는 너가 메신들아 닌든 중얼 joy 네 나찰 가니 수가요 말에 소소 나찰 너가 말데 그 주도 젠데 지 카라사당라 마디 나 차이나 하리나 그 디제는 나찰 레고레스라 대신에 미디어 콜라 인지미 콘돌라 주고 사메 콜로 메바이나라 대신 민도 젠데야 내지 뇨모 왕기 그 제상 단다 타히도 도말라 소바데 거기 콜라야 뇨모도 좀 요러 라한테 샤샤당 콘도 요상 되게 주제기 치네 아니 그런 네버치 거레스 아니 나차디지 깜바도 보면 나야 돼 그 차와라 소바다 지 칼라만디와 대사만디와 간데 주제질라 때니 먼저 나고레스 되니니 디펜 나고야기 가서 동해 뇽고야 지버레스 이네 미지기 치나라 소이니 미들페 컨트롤라야다 소소소게다 할 지그 티발라 소서 나와야 되나 가서 컨트롤 사용다스다 단데 도드 사스라야제 치시는데
Right? And so then, so that's the kind of the question to be asked is, why do we get angry with these beings, but we don't get angry with something like a sickness, right? So it says, it continues, although they are not wanted, these sicknesses arise, and likewise, although they are not wanted, these afflictions forcibly arise. So, just like we don't wish to get sick, right? We never, wish to get sick. It's not something that we think, we wish for, but rather based on certain causes and conditions that arise, they give rise to a particular sickness, and then that sickness causes us suffering, right? But we can say that in the same way, the various afflictions that arise within Tashi and within Dolma, who are then, motivated by those afflictions to cause us difficulties, they too just arising as a set of causes and conditions in very much the same way that the sickness does, right? They don't, just like we didn't wish for the sickness, they didn't wish to get angry and so forth. So, in the one hand, we have causes and conditions, without wishing for it, just causes and condition giving rise to a sickness, but we don't get angry. But on the other hand, we have something that unwished for, but causes and conditions giving rise to anger and so forth in Tashi and Droma, and then they cause us harm, and we do get angry at that. So, but what is really the difference? Why do we get angry with one and not the other?
지소 나로라 데르 소다 베나 지기 신도다 가리나 송고르 데마서 차타요나 다들 마가 쇼지 신도나 롱라 엔데 지긴다 와 데미지기 저나 엔데 쉬니 지마로 차타요 엔데 지나 데미들랑 가서 노 빼랑그라 코가 같이니 쉬웨이나 아니 녜코 데라고 샤이메라죠 와 당게 코 가리나 가리자기네 근데 길리도 하지나 예 기쁘지잖아 콜라디 자바게 소소소소 잠잠아서 키도 신도다 도도드는 레키니 마서와다 타페만 나와 치빠치샤레 근데 미치기 전화를 쉬어있네 베 콘돌라니 나라 가진치네 이거 딱딱소이 아니 다도 진짜 뭐 비싸면 냐마냐마 치체스다리야 치 아니는 마음바에 다리 카테 잡아도나 유망하래 근데 치게든 수수게 싸먹게 많았다고 봐 근데 치디가 제상아도 디데 템네를 나가서 럽지스티오데 다시 손나는 뭐이니 쓰는 거라서 근데 중국도
And so it might just seem like a strange thing written in the book, but actually we experience this a lot in our day-to-day life. We can think, as we're going around, if we suddenly bang our head in the tree and we got, a big wound and a lot of blood coming out, we wouldn't really get angry at the tree, right? But if a person comes along and hits you on the head and the same thing has happened, you've got a wound and it bleeds out, you're going to get very angry at that person, right? Because again, the mind is carried away with that in a dissimilar way to what happens with the tree, right? With the tree, we don't start thinking like, oh, why did the person do it? Or, if I don't stop them, then they might do it again in the future and this and this. So there's so much more conceptuality that comes along with that. But in both cases, kind of the outcome was the same. So it's something that we have a lot more of conceptuality with respect to the person, but not with respect to the tree.
지당이 트리바다 무슨 나서도 콘도 가도 뇌지 우선 생바요 말해서 근데 기시 라와 이나 라인도 리고다 저 자시 마상장스 나 토기는 산노도 메바 이나야 스라 나산자 제원남이 지나토 가진네 가도 토고르스 농나야죠 같이 토고르스 제바 자시 마상장 아니 토와테니 제원지르스 네 가티테즈 치데 데스칼레 하우다 딜레 친데들 타오라 ¿Cuál es? No les entra. ine dide chimachen dramas ine ta khanda kharla osna ngazo tho deushin de khashigi ti nga control lango san semba jiro tho chashi masancha tho thogi la ni chi de gi kulu me ba ina jewo na ni china tho khachin tho go resra kulu la lu la go yade ani cheba chashi masancha thowa teni thowa teji chewonjis chidangi kulu me ba ina ta ngazo ninjala de cheyuda 파길라 미치기 컨트롤 하주고 sam에 그놈 메바이나래 신동이나 주로 동해지 떼고서는 그놈 메바이나래 이제 지정이 중앙 집어를 때 이내 가서들 팔 토야라 집어치 들어왔어.
So then we might kind of think, well, it's not really the same, right? We kind of want to debate about this, right? That actually the tree example and the person example, they're not really the same, right? Because again, there's a question about motivation and the intentionality about it. So then the next verse is talking about that anger is not generated intentionally, right? So it says, without thinking, I will be angry. People become angry with no resistance, without choice. And without thinking, I will produce myself. Likewise, anger itself is produced, right? So, it's not the case that people have a certain choice or a motivation that I will become angry and so forth. So it's not that they do so willingly. So then, and yet nevertheless, just like the tree that didn't really have this intention to harm us, right? The anger itself, doesn't choose to be produced. Likewise, the person generating it didn't choose to produce the anger, so it did so without this kind of intention, just like the tree, right? So why do we get angry with one and not the other?
기타기 디 대비시샤시도 코스테스 녀고이라 무슨 다시 타오르디야 다시 데스칼레 가게도 차기나 근데 차기데 데스야 이나가서 풀어 산다야데 펜토다 파카르라시 치칼레 참마 디젤로너라 이나 로로드네 코데오니 데오데요데야 셰디야 띵사고야 보싱라 이네 코즈 녀고민다스
Yes, it can be a bit difficult to kind of follow these kind of debates, but it's something that's very useful, right? It can be very useful to really think about it, like in terms of the debate that's being presented, right? So it's really something to sit down and carefully think about, and there's a lot of benefit to that.
Tatanda di ola di legdura, niepa tata hiende junwe rawameba, cheza. Nieba ganzula chi dunge kharij na ya sa energy semla dunge kharij chungwa in du sama juda chen la ten chungwa chi ta ganzo gita nambe gi juna lo tende la jura chi po chi la chungya yo ma khari na kange ina ra mi chi ganzo zamza ganzo ta pen mi chi la lung na mi din zga chu go ra ro pe cha ga na de ni yo ma pe na ta ganzo do ma sin ji ngala lung la wa ina do ma dinga la khaje lung na sha ra chen ji pa cha ga do ro 아주 콜라 가잖아. 디쇼로기 루포텔 롱랑이도 해. 원에 코랑기 지금 라방 구당으로지. 들롱랑이도 해. 원에 코랑기 싸면 당당들 롱랑이도 해. 바짝가 되는 건 많이 해로 차고라. 봐. 근데 인상 잠잠 저기 미지기 소소를 컨트롤하는 콜라 카야 말이야. 콜라의 요모 두순 여러. 근데 인상 콜라 디 와도 주로 그러면 미 코랑 라시기 야보 있나야. 잠자디 빼요. 요모 두순에 언제 첨보라. 제가 두순라고 해도 가는 거 빼도 미 남도 야보지네 디 요모도 걸 주운 사대가나 미 조어도 세다 봐 근데 미 야보지네 동도 숙청부잖아 조어도 봐 민게마다 만도 어디 차도다 근데 인자 콜라 카요 말에 콜라 요모도 선 요르 സമയ지 근데 സമയ이나 파기기 밀라 안에 롱나야 돼 근데 저기 콘도지 마샤도다 근데 സമയ에 계속
So then in this way it says that the Yeah, so in general, when we can say that all suffering that we experience arises due to a set of causes and conditions, right? There's nothing that is outside of that. In Buddhism, we have this concept of all things being dependent arising, right? That everything that exists arises in dependence upon something else. There is nothing that arises independently of something else. And so likewise, when a certain person gets angry and harms us, we can think about that we try to pinpoint, we point the finger at Dolma or whoever it is that's getting angry at us, but really, when we think about that person, then it is not really something that we can find from its own side that is the thing that is getting angry, right? It all happens in dependence upon something else. It's not Dolma's hands that are angry. It's not their head that is angry. It's not this and that of them that is angry. But in dependence upon these various causes and conditions, there is the anger. Right, so that's one way to try and think about the anger coming from that person, but also to think that these various types of afflictions that people have, they're very forceful, right? They're very strong, these afflictions, and so when someone is overcome by the three types of afflictions like anger, attachment, ignorance, it really kind of changes them. It really kind of changes the way that they behave and the way that they are. Some people can be very peaceful and nice, but then they get overtaken by something like anger, and they really almost become a different type of person. So understanding that everyone has afflictions and everyone can come under the influence of the afflictions, we can kind of try to think about it in a more spacious way.
Zamna ngazo te tsawon de ma dine ngazo khala na michile lungro shla de gala michi phai le tsitsu bu chla ina kra ji ta khala pango ji ra kra be chojin kala na bu ka ba dal kharla ina re ani kra ji de shara pango kharla ina ra tsitsu bu chla ina ngazo digala simni ani kontrol phai le shuji kontrol ma go ne ra su ngola hal de khachala ina su be man tang sha ra 제 거기 라야디 그 가르라와이나 지금 되네라 되는 당시나 먼저 컴퓨터를 말아 되네들 먼저 되느냐 아니 나라 사람 마부다니 그 강이 마부지 먼저 생부스거든.
So, and likewise, we can think, in terms of someone saying a harsh word to us, so whatever kind of nasty word they want to say, like calling us a donkey or something, right? Then actually, right, the word is just a word that someone has said, right? And it didn't take a lot of effort for them to produce. But for us, we hear that word and we hold on to that word and then we analyze that word and we keep thinking about that word. And then that gives it all of that power to really make us suffer, as opposed to just being able to, again, just hear it and let it go. And then none of that really affects us in the same kind of way.
Sando yabochi tangwaina ngazo miji tasu kontrolan chana pungurola pungu la cha jala wainara ngazo pungu chan rugo mara ngazo ne wora mal khaje ne mambola ne pe mambola ngazo simba so ne pe mo chaida ine ngazo ko kar la me la ma ngazo chan rugo mare kyo be da thade la yiro chila ne ngazo ti chan rugo mara ngazo le ngazo sando ma to 하길래 디잖아 집어두고 말라 이제 가서 나란조에 투도고 산다다 건가 되게 가질 내는 내려.
Right, so and it doesn't really matter how much that person can keep calling us a donkey again and again and again. We're not going to become a donkey, right? So it's not that that person's words really have the power to harm us in any kind of a way. So why is it that we keep giving them that power to do that?
Random the big alana to see out the raccoons and share. That is that and the ola saw de la Harley. And Yapa Tada Chile Jung, Rather Yapa Karaching and Judah Chain and Littleton Jungers. Chungway, Rawayumar, quality color so Rawame, free humor, Cousin Ra. Depend Niba Chini let the Tamalota, Niba Chini Tangidan, Niba Candace Mokandajina Ra, Nawatawa in the Regicondola and the Takanda Chikangi, the Niba, Mandiba Karajuvaina, don't some Tangi dance. Deeper number to Deeper Sagra, Deeper number Natsoba, Deeper Candajina Ra. Oh, did Tunzuche, Ani, take us chain to Chungares. Ra, Jude chain and the chain rally or rest, change it doubly and it chungares. Then they in some color Rawayomares, Ra, Rawayuma, my Nina, Galan Rosapa Chibarore. Chesangazuchi Kangiro, Chitu, and the Pagile Chignuba, Jason, the color Jude change your tiki, Jujan, and the Kangi the Chunga, the Pagijan Society around the bag, and the Chungores, and the Dilla Pasanatana.
So then the next verse tells us that all faults that exist and the variety of negativities arise through the force of conditions. They do not have autonomy, right? So again, this is kind of still in the same vein of what we have been discussing, that all these various faults, meaning all these kind of faults and negativities, like the different difficulties and obstacles that we face, but likewise the negativities such as anger and things like that, all of in us and in other people, all of these things just arise in dependence upon certain causes and conditions, right? And by the very fact of them arising due to causes and conditions mean they lack a certain autonomy, right? They're not free to decide it by themselves. They are conditioned by something else. So due to lacking autonomy, if we are able to think about these things in that way, that they lack this autonomy, then again it can be very helpful in reducing our anger and irritation towards that.
Tadi ola di le do. Tadi ngazu thwatin nda mara. Shiba shiga nda. Thwatin che thang. Ta tanda zo na. Zo namjur rangwa de cheba ka ba. Zo ngazu ge namju ju lunga ge namju ju ro. Ti rangwa de cheba ka ba.
Choms.
Ah. Ti dosa, ti par shima sa ji de. Ale di chomsa. 대다기 지진 근데 쟤는 초반에 뒤창서라 어르르 이게 사진을 다 대다기 있어 지진 라와제 많이 봐 주도 쟤도 라와제 많이 봐 신화제 세상 신을라리 그래서 아니 다이강을 저 잡아나신기 쟤남 초바 쟤만 보지 초바라 쟤는 초바 대다장 쟤만 보지 초바 대다장 아니 제바 자시 세미디스 semba mes tinde gi jiji nge chirang la andi kangi zo sa tinde ji kangi ji chu sa gi kola sando yo ma sra semi pa semba mes teji tenyang teji de tinde control so ba ji bi ra du nge ji do du nge tenyang da gi ji da ji semba yo ba mai nos tadi karad lagu sana ani chetang ngazo juda chen la tene ani ngazo kangi mambo jinjo go re la ra tinde wi jijen dige ani nge chona la kangi jizo go sana kona la ani kunu da samlo me ba ina yas tinde wi dunge di kona ya jijen chang ba la tene ngazo kal kangi thim go res ani dela ya tinde wi dunge di ngazo la kangi zo go sana semba da kunu da ande yo ma res
So then, lacking this autonomy, we see that the next verse says, these conditions that assemble together do not think I will produce, nor does their product think I will be produced. Right? So all these various causes and conditions that produce our various sufferings. So those causes and conditions, whatever they might be, they don't have that intention or that motivation that I will produce suffering in that way. It's just that when these assemble together, they give rise to a particular result. And likewise, the suffering that is produced, the result, likewise, it's not able to think like, oh, I will, be produced, right? I will arise. Again, that just happens, as the result of certain causes and conditions coming together. So in that way, they lack this autonomy and they lack this motivation as well.
다 중다도 마신에 아디게 칭기 방사 거마 지나인 하고요. 다 먼저 주조데 주조기 아니 투르래 저라. 건전히 투다기 마시미는 데스카라 카오라. 가서 나 지단게 라왕시가 되게 단단하죠. 지대타지 아니 주조기 서래라. 주조 서래 아니 지간조 과과야라 소바리 주조기 가서는 시제 유시장아 다들도 고슬란 로고지 말라. 디야 투다는 주르도. 다 간데 들려다. 조시샤 간데바 조이 카른데바 데스 다지 딱발라 내가 저기다 다지 쳐라 따바 가인바스 대니 다니 준준시 달에 쳐래라 라고라 코나기라 치데스 삼신 중앙메스 마체파니 데미나 대체 쳐와 데바가 다치나데 먼저 중탈라 전에 시작이더라 디급로 가르치고서는 어떻게 중탈 안에 단체바로 아니 지다이 나라서지 코야 될래야 아니 주조고 소샤레스 주조기 먼저 시장이 시장하시 주르스 디게 아니 디게 완전 먼저 코야 디고로 시기더라 다다 카투들이 뭐자 가르쳐야시라 손다
So then the next section deals with refuting the existence of autonomous causes. And so here in particular, it's talking about a particular system called the Samkhya system, which was an ancient system of philosophy. So this is a bit complicated, so we're not going to go into the details and the tenet systems of all these philosophies. But in brief, this kind of system believes that all of samsara, or everything that exists, is kind of enumerated as 25 different types of phenomena, but that all of these different types kind of come down to a single unitary cause, right? That there is kind of a root cause to all of it, and that cause is the thing that gives rise to everything. And so the verse here says, that which is asserted as principle, which is this root cause, and that which is imputed as self, do not arise after having purposefully thought, I shall arise. If they are unproduced and non-existent, then what wish could they have to produce? So again, it's simply addressing this particular assertion by the Samkhya school, who have this idea that all of these phenomena come down to a single cause, but then saying that also this particular cause, since it is just taking part in causes and conditions, also does not have this autonomy to arise in the same way as other things.
Tindejina da nga namju la ni shi ni shi ta zanga yebe na lo la chik pa tan sara chi zo di pa pi ni ani ni sa shi la wora ti namju re la wora ta de ne chi zo di chang korang gi takwa yin ro la wor tang je korang ta di ndo bar shira wo la tsa chi di khat ne la chi te sa da de ta na ni la chi ji chang gi chi zo di takwa yin la wa yin na ra ani kha jin che ba me ban je le nang kha na shi tong bar wa ta ba ro ni na ra Digi ani chizogi chiti cheware dizo varilani la mi jodo ra kasna ko tapainza dil ligda sawadla chite date sa tanani kashin cheba meba ngunsra nakajin de kogi chizogi di chere dizo la mi ban zu sa mi jodo chagdo asla
ditso kon
lasa tiparo chikame de no hainsa ale tanda di chera 이번이
알레레
찍라다 시리 투부도 자와인데 시리기 단다딜레도 다 시리기 집을해 주라 주조도 다 시리기 집을해 제가 다 주조디 아니 시장이 시장을 소바도 투네 아니 타투운도가 다 시리 집부딩은 좀 고코니 아니 콜 코디 벌는 두다 나물래 엔데요 라 근데 이제 다기 남주래디 주조기 투셰비기 시장이 시장을 소바라 들으셔고라 다 시리 레지도 시리기 집부 유라서 라와도스 론체발라 가바 제가 다 시리기 집부스니데 아니 유라서서 라와게 아니 론체 요마스 가이스나 주조기 시전이 주장아 주투버리 투버디 왕게가 좀고 다칼로 디 왕도 주로라 그래서
양크스티 담은디 양크스
딜라고 당아서 중다리기 너에나 담보 중다 단지버기라 너나지제 아니 코랑이 주조선지도 와 Tapena nga zamni ga mi du khol khandas khol tuda chire ma chida na be jung bi bet kon shida mata te koran zu karan de wala na chu zo sen ji yor yes chu zo di shi jen shi tsanga ji ani koran tu shar ta mi ro go ta ro ra tinde yin tsanga ani da shi ri gi chebu sen ji yor ta nga zo do kare ni ro mudi shi jen shi tsanga lang go thom ni ani nga zo khol kho de wor yes la ta da shi ri gi chebu di ni ma ji lo ro che ji khar koran ji ya bo ji cha de ga chu zo gu tu ba yi ba ha ko 다 지조 가서 고고다네 가서 코알라 근데 코추샤라 데 하고 우디가라 아니 다 지조 디칼로 지 모차주로 근데 잘란 지나 시간이 중단나 여러 이내 딱 한다 가르시고라나 지조기 시전이 시장을 투버라 때네 아니 다시리 지부디게 아니 가서 코알 코디고 디콜 시고 레스인데 라 이내 이디 가서 남배 중기 시단지 말이더라 중다지기 시단 싫어버 중다지기 시단 아니 딜라고 자와딜라 가서나 yula tade inchiropa ngapan juwa mainos yula tade inchiropa de yula tada iwa chola de pena tanda dashiri gi chibu chiro tinde wi chibu de yud karla wa tanda sijen ju zanga ji tele inde wa ta ko kwa ko de ra inchiropa ani ngapan juwa maino tinde ani kala ko pedo ko takor ji ko de pa sam zoya me baro che tinde me ba mare do sle this showed
Right. So the kind of the gist of this philosophical system is that you have you have the consciousness of the self, which is observing these various types of phenomena, these 25, which are all reducible to this root cause, right, in themselves. And the idea being that by being kind of deceived by these 25 into thinking about that as the self, then one continues cycling within samsara. But the problem here, from the Buddhist point of view, is that since this self, this is kind of, and this root cause are kind of posited as permanent, autonomous, and independent and unitary, then so it says in the next line, since it would permanently apprehend objects, it follows that it would never cease to do so. So this self, which is the observer, since it is permanent, would never cease to observe these types of objects, and so could never be liberated from samsara and so forth. And then the next line, talking about the objects of that, this root cause that gives rise to these 25, it says, furthermore, if the self were permanent, it's still about the self, it would clearly be devoid of action, just like space. So if these kind of things which are said to be acting as causes or as having kind of the ability to know were really permanent in this way, then they would simply cease to ever doing that, because they would permanently be stuck doing that.
Tadila and Tananga Tanjipa, the Ripachamba, the Ripachamba is Shigdora. Ripachamba is Darangwa Chen Gaba. Daddy Rangwajin with the Pagawo, Pamela, the Kalota, against Churesra, till assume your is such it is the Lonia. Ani as Tabe, Debuchiba, Meteba, Jutapa Latin of the Debuchi, Lenny Human, Cousin Lagging and Judachain Mamuji Godlasan, and the New Mocha or the Judachain, the Mamuji Tenich. She's not tapping in the Buchevati, Cheo Yubati, Mutipalatica, Cheo Yumarella, right? And a chain tuba Metcurse. Chain tuba Mutiba. Chain dugura. Chain tuba Mutipa dance, chain dance and Java meba. She's not the dig tabig Juchi Mares, chain tuba Mutipa Ladigala. Java meba. Tatagi di Tilasa, Dashiri Chibula Sobadi, Tugulasa, Takanda di Dodo di Colors, tapping in the Wichawa Gabala, the old Sachi de Dila, tapping in the Wichawa Gabani, Chite is that Tanani, Kesi Dashiri Sobata, Tapa in Vainara, that Tapa in any Nankajinde. Ra, Kajin Chiba Mebangos, and Nankana Shigi, and Tomba Race, and Chanagi, Kangi Garis, Teo in the Judah Chenet, and the Chumari Layam to Asla.
So that was one school to do with the Samkhya. Now we also have a different school that has similar kind of assertions but slightly different, called the Nyayayikas. And so here they're talking again about a permanent self. And so again, so just kind of to summarize what's going on, is that the main issue that is being that seems to be the problem is the idea that these are kind of permanent causes, right? That they seem to be acting as causes, and yet they're said to be permanent. The self is said to be permanent, or these objects are said, the root cause is said to be permanent. But then the problem is that, as it says in the root verses, that furthermore, if the self were permanent, it would clearly be devoid of action, just like space. So things that are permanent, like space, it doesn't have this ability to act as causes and conditions, because it is unchanging. So in that way, it is unsuitable to think about these things as being permanent in this way. Shempatila
Kuruda. Chitangi dilla Cindy della Duedura, Taina. Shiriki Chibuti Yula, Sano, Carasano, Muchipis, Tujenchi is a Gabaran Julia, Maino, Des, Main Paratel, that it does it Tangda. Yula Lonchipis, a Tangus, a K number, Kain Bateina, Yula, a Tata, Yuan Jua, Juetes. You didn't mean Zembi that it's over. Didn't disera. That the wallet I cheated last door. I cheated that a tongue ina, nays a two Dujemarwas, Chitan do Machechi and Nanka, Machechi, but in Didura. Tadi Carolana di Odla. Chandler, Tuba, Metiba, Kapala, Metibala, Dra, Chandler Tuba, Metibal. Tadi Zawa de la Carolina. Chenam, Mazuku Juda Chenra, Chenam, Zentang, Chenayang. Kissing Joa Meva in a Chanang Joa, but Tapanas in Lava in a that it's over. This Kalikawa Yura, the debate Chimanuna, this Kalayures. Chesa, that Chanang and this Lava in Chena and Casa Chena, Zenta Tina, the Jujin, but the Tiva in a Tina Yans, Joa meets Joa Mela, Chiche, kissing Joa Madonna. And Carriers, right? Pagin so the channel that you can get ko taba na chadi go rest ta perang kirang taba ing lawa ina de kien de so wa ina joa ke tu marwas jebi chayang ngajin ani ngoma na je ranje taba na je de ge res jeba tele jeba da ta jingo bodo kare ina tele kar chaya res kaso ko jije so na joa ji manda wa ina ngazo kala na je je kare ina jije so wala ten kange jingo res tra jipoje ten jingo mares jije mamboje so ten ani ngazo kange jingo re tene insa charangi 파 zoba komti galane sala gangano kontrolan sala langado pe mamboira ra tene jiji zuzu sarago marla ta so dodo de dirsha
so then it says that from the root verse, right, that even if met with other conditions, what could be done to something unchanging? And if it remains as before, even when acted upon, then what could actions do to it? Right? So here again, we're talking about the idea that, if we really think about the person, the self, as being unchanging, as being autonomous in this kind of way, which goes against what we've been talking, right? But our natural way of seeing it is as this autonomous, permanent kind of person who has this, autonomy. But if the person was really autonomous in this way, then as it says, even if it met with other conditions, what could be done to something unchanging? Right? So if we were really autonomous and permanent in that way, then if we were to meet with all these different kinds of conditions, how could they change us? Right? And likewise, if it remains as before when acted upon, then what could actions do to it? Right? So if there's no change brought about, then what can those things really do? Right? So in this way, whenever we think about causes and conditions, really, what are they doing? They have to create some kind of a change, right? Whenever we think about the environment and the various types of causes and conditions, they give rise to some type of change. Otherwise, that's the main thing that they do. So if, on the other hand, we think of ourselves and so forth as autonomous, as permanent, then it kind of goes against this idea of things arising due to causes and conditions.
다 간다 또 도도 가르셔라나 다나가 또 다이니 마 인고디에디라 다 도도로 주사지 거라 본다 고나 말로도 디가라 다리 빼모 부시에서 똥바레나 빼사라 제가 도도디 가르라와스나 가저기 치 가란솔라 차동모서 뭐 부지 제운 거라 제운 디가라 때틀라람사 카데 맞아데 파게 치 컨트롤한 사이나 데차치 사이나 카데나 콜 주제 마보지어스 라 때는 가서 다들 주베 것이나 컨트롤을 빼샤네 야가도 파이 컨트롤하니 들 카요 말스 콜 주제 마보지어스 콜은 데차치단 컨트롤하지 참아요데 데 온기 하는 가라 컨트롤한 레사메지다라 계시기 데네 상황에는 수수가라시 컨트롤 많이 운도야 편도도 대체 아니 지지젠다 데네 지디가라 아니 수수게 다데네 치춘주지랑 아니 컨트롤하는 쳐야 말스 수수수다 파쇼도 수수닌자를 상다에도 파기를 가지나 오르 콜 카요 말라냐 데스마 뉴도다 다가 딘디 춘주질랑아 데네 콘도 좀 가지나 올라냐 마 쇼니가 좀 마차에도 근데 마차에는 수수랑식이 sembal이로 잡아 그래서 다리 카르 뭐 가르셔에는 도도 마 동로제는 딘데스
So to kind of try and summarize this, right, because otherwise it's just kind of going to pass us over without much meaning, then really, again, it's talking about thinking about people who get angry at us, for example, whichever affliction, but here we're talking about anger, right? So when someone is getting angry at us, thinking that arises due to all these various causes and conditions, right? That they don't have this autonomy, or that they're not, self-governing and permanent, but rather that they are arising due to various causes and conditions. And if we're able to think in that way, that this kind of arose due to certain causes and conditions, and again it gives us a wider perspective on that person anger and why they're doing it. And so when they're speaking harsh words to us and so forth, we don't have to respond with anger. We are able to kind of mitigate our anger by thinking along these lines, to thinking about the way that these things necessarily lack this autonomy due to arising through causes and conditions.
잠잠 소리 미스나로 소소가 상노다는 잠잠 소소하고 소소 노트 소소 라 내가 롱이마다 소소 로춘주가는 엔디지제 이미지라 콘토치 라인 데디가는 그 치춘주실라는 콘토 같이 라인에서 반다데 소소 로존도치 따제 통제 첨부장디가 하고다 노트 옹이마가 미지게 엔들랑 하딜 콘토 쇼실라 바이 나 디디 같이 라인에는 소소 노트 하고다 라 대나시 소소가 지기 잠잠아도 지콘도데 신완지로디가 젠치주지를 전부서 콘도랑샤고라 네 준세시라요 말라 네 잠자 아주 미즈 나로를 하고 니 망아티 콘돌란스 때 가르치는 아이는 게 되게 맞잖아 따다 인사면도 질 하고 해야 되는 얘기다 근데 양도 용돼야 돼 저기 칼로 통치스 쳐
Right. So again, this is something that we can investigate on our own experience. That we know that sometimes we can sometimes see the mistakes of our ways of thinking kind of after the fact, right? We got angry with someone, and we can sometimes spot our own mistaken ways of thinking. Because we can see that it was such a small cause, and it created such a big explosion of anger that really it was kind of pointless. There was not really a good reason to get so angry at that person, but nevertheless, in that moment, going under the influence of the anger, we get really angry and it kind of overtakes us. So, in that way, if we're able to think about these things, kind of coming from causes and conditions, it can help us to identify these kind of mistakes that the anger makes. Yeah? Okay, so let's leave it here for now, and we can, if you have any questions, and please feel free to ask. So is there any doubts or any of this, or something you didn't understand, or anything at all? And also just in general, if you have any questions, about in life in general, and you want to know how to deal with certain things, and if we know how to help you, we will.
No.
You talked last class about the word in Tibetan for meditation, and you also said meditation, and it's also habituating or being familiar with something. That it's the same word, and I was wondering, I never heard about it before, and I'm wondering if there are two different words also for meditation or not, and is it the only goal of meditation, being familiar with something, and then being able to, when you get to the situation, then to know how to react because you're already familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. 저는 쇼게들랑이 곰기하기 콜라 그지셔서 아니 제 디캅스디 직디 곰스 세야디 nen디 곰티 대바 곰티 티바 기돈다기 요레스 아니 공기 치고디 담보데 돈다디 직부디레 그러니까 디 티스기아 체와 이요레 하나 가르치는 딜디앙 곰티 티바기 제와 요레 인지 키직 between raw jetsang inen pöketungen die goms matogyon
gom de komle die teacher
eine karchene gom gyapa die goms ti gom ti tia ki jawa da jawa yo
pena ngazo ji gom ro jawenara ngazo ta pena ngazo gom je ji le metri ji le gom je ro gom je tambo pe kalkaboda sembata oja dira kalikaboyo ine dilane tari gomje sanye gomje nimata pa kali uzu jewena kali gom ine use charoda teze no logarda ra gomje ba meditation ine kali use legda ra gomdo res odela tini kichaba testado ne tambu gombala dane gom ra 당아서 가리네 내가 가리는 담부 지고라 지기지기 네 kali di gom시 charoda.
So in terms of the word, so this it's a bit of a peculiarity of the Tibetan language. So in one way it's the same word, but it's different. Okay? So there's the same verb, which is gom and kom, and one is a volitional verb and one is a non-volitional verb, right? So in one sense, so when we say to meditate, right, we are doing it volitionally, right? So it's an active action that we undertake, right? So we sit down and we try to meditate on something, and so at first it's quite difficult to do, but then day by day we keep meditating on it, and then it becomes, we put effort into familiarizing with it, and so day by day it becomes easier and easier until we can say that we have become used to it, or we have become familiarized with it. We have habituated ourselves to it. So in that sense, there are two different words being used because one is the active process of doing it, and one is talking about the result of having been habituated with a certain thing.
근데 그게 지당이 나디 칼라 사야라 공샤래도. 이를 칼라 그 habit 차실라고라. 대체보다 이거는 habit래다. meditation에다 유스루래도. 근데 저보다 그게도래 다나시 곰래도 곰래도. 되게 제발이오라.
Yeah, so in English we have all these different words like to meditate and then to familiarize, to have a habit, to be used to something. But in Tibetan it's really dealing with this pair of verbs, which is one is the active way of creating familiarity, or, which we say meditate, and then the other is the result of that, which is the having developed that familiarity, being familiar.
Can I just so is it being familiar with the sitting and concentrating, or is it familiarity with the emotion that arises in the moment, or the way I react to this emotion? Like, what do I?
Karala gomchi chegore. The deala gomchi chegore yana. Donang chela, donang shaya de yana. The netang draminda la kandis ki nyumong ki kare kaya dan karela gomchi chegore.
근데 그 곰래 라와라 곰래 곰신드라.
니까 잡으래.
곰래인데 배나가 저기 칭하기 수수기 셈발라 지 조제다야라 소바지 칼레제네라 곰자래다. 배나가 저기 학군도 지 곰아이나 학군도 인데나 차니 대지 포상하다는 배 셈바까 까니 우주로 오잖니라. 곰래데 싫어 칼레 마제네 그 칼레지 지디는 따라 바로 레장나 셔도지 레죠. 곰래데 드네로 차거라. 곰래데 인지 미징아 저기 다 sabzaro chini chigora
and it is on tadepadela gomdela and karela
gomdela da ngazo ji kusutu de gomdaire ane pena ngazo geta dia gomchagor de pena ngazo ale kondo laem de kondo lana chen di tu ane ko zoba gomne di dia gomchagor dara ngazo gi gomla digala jegomdo jogomni ya wa jegomdo jogom 라 배낭 저기 천이도 자와도 아니도 칼로는 좁아져야지 제공을 애널리시스 줘라 제바ችን 디 진짜 가르카르는 파도야 돼 제공을 조금도 이건 애널리티컬도 심바다 샤디니라 디가 좀 조금라 곰도 니 그랬어 네 곰래도 다도 곰라는 너네가 저기 장난셔도죠 그게 쉬우쉬우 깔래 맞잖아 그 제디디가네 차도셔
So in terms of what we meditate on, then there's a whole variety of things to meditate on, and again it depends upon the usage of the word. So it's difficult to pronounce for me. So if we're talking about the results aspect of it, of having become familiarized, then that you can think it's also kind of like developing a habit, right? So one just develops a habit. Even by accident sometimes we develop certain habits, but we already have those habits, and then we certain grow in a certain way. But when we're talking about meditating, then this is an intentional activity, so this is something that we put effort into. And then in terms of what we meditate on, what we're familiarizing ourselves with, then again there's a whole variety of different types of meditations. In general, we can divide them into like stabilization meditation, right, where we're developing concentration, something like visualization, a Buddha deity in front of us and settling the mind with that. But also there's the analytical meditations where sometimes you see the monks and nuns debating, so this is kind of counting within the analytical meditation of thinking about various topics. And likewise in our context here, then thinking about how to overcome anger, thinking about the disadvantages of anger and things like that, engaging in this kind of analysis is also to meditate upon that.
드링은 저기 지대에 조금 차고라. 라 저바를 사네 아니 저발라 편요 가르도 이미 가르도 간데스 공부도 내 마음이 상다라. 라 그래서 사람들 희자야 되는 거 상다 참 조금 차고라.
So everything that we kind of did today, for example, we're thinking about the advantages of patience, the disadvantages of anger, how to deal with these things. So this all kind of forms a part of analytical meditation, things that we can think about and analyze, things like that. Yeah.
So, as you have said, that all things are impermanent and all things they depend on causes and conditions. So a general perspective is that everything is illusion, but there are certain causes and conditions which are not created by things which are out of our control. But there are certain causes and conditions which intentionally we can inculcate. If somebody is angry, so maybe a few thoughts which are coming from his own head. So there are no external influences which are making him do these things. So what is the opinion about having not being angry with the person, but still having this sort of question about the causes? Why is he creating these something?
And then also the Mishempa the control malaya la and the some Guken Latene Kipare, some Pandra, Padang to this one, and then Chetan Sama Mitapadam, Guken Latin, Tenjumre, and a Chetan de la Rawan Yumares, in a young Munachina Mikashi Consul Dendeki Kulong Euro, Consul Consulnity, some of Dukchetang and Consul the Control Langire and a Chetina, Karachegara, the Tipamaret.
디 오늘 컨트롤하니지도 디 칼나 답변은 나도 시콜 컨트롤하게 나라 디 칼라는 얘기 나이 얘기 디 나라 칼라는 나라 되셔시단 컨트롤로 디가 와도 좋다 페는 나이 코랑이 잘라도 지라 차 yana kope keta chimbo dine shana nga chado na ra ande shashida temu teta mari ba chamala lego ra chesa chiki nga ra ta asla jo mara nye nga la ya jabden yora ra de shashida konto de ti nga la no shudo shten nga chala kono la ndo ne shara da ti chinga la ko ine dia samdana kora ra na sha jumare kora la ya korangi dosha da shana dia dosha dia jaw hamanga ma ma chi komne le sara dosha shana konto de zura tanda di sechibu mare jaw hamani ma sam tanga zu lende kene na na dire ga sam ta ya zamzang da di ma ta ida
na tik
zamzang za ene sang da mi khashi chige su tu da control la di do ra tadi khashi ne nga zu nyela dewa yo ine sang ya bo ta na kira jaw hamanga ma zu ta di ja zamni ga la jaw pe mo le sara sunje na jirangi machi manu ko mele tinde chi jaw silen sara tide indi ga la jaw hamanga ne kira ge chuni par jaw da ya bo me sigra ra di sa na ta chi che chi khara zamzang za mi chi tu da ko la be chi sendani odo gauro le da ra ngo shin go mara ngela ke she nyu mara to nyu mara ine hob de chi mara chona kyuro le da ye kyo hama ge ngara so da chi dewa ji ye zang ande le go ra che zang ko lo khon la ya de dari o nge ko le signa bu nge ko le du je ke ko chi che mes ne ngala ande chi lu la go sa sa le do ti chona ta da de la ma je wa ina kyo hama ne zo gi ti she si ra o de le ga
So yeah, it's sometimes the case that people have all sorts of, afflicted mentality that, will cause them to generate the anger. But again, we should think that those things are very much to do with the person having this, the three poisons within them of ignorance, attachment, and anger. So if I give an example, if I get very, if you become very rich and famous, then maybe I develop jealousy towards that, right? Or if you have a certain item, then I have attachment towards, I want to get that. And so, although someone might have these different ways of thinking that will create this anger in themselves, that has kind of it is backed by, or it is impelled by, projected by the previous ways of thinking which are coming from the three poisons within the mind, right? So also those come from a certain set of causes and conditions, and then it really kind of comes from the previous habit, right? Previous familiarity with anger and attachments and so forth, which again, if one believes in past and future lives, and not just coming from this life, but a habit stretching out way, way back into countless previous lives. So it's not that this just a localized thing right now, but again, that has its own causes and conditions that causing that to happen due to that familiarity. And so, and also in terms of these previous lives, so, it happens sometimes if we meet someone and then we immediately kind of dislike them, we kind of get a bit irritated with them, right? Whereas other people, we meet them and we do like them when we meet them. And we kind of think, well, why is that? And again, that's all coming from all these various familiarities coming from previous life's experiences. And so when someone gets angry with us, we kind of tend to think, oh, well, I didn't do anything to this person. Like, why are they angry with me? But again, it kind of comes down to all this previous baggage, in a sense, that we have from these previous lives as well.
Jacob Chimbuji, Chinju to the Saya and the Virgin. Kodia Chapala. Ni Jacob de get a chimbuso, ni Jacob Chimbasa, some on the do. There's some tamboco, the chair. I pick get a chimbujan, pen and go to Sinze Rogina. Nigi mission by Jacob Chimba, Tamani or Duton, I get a chimbucha, get a chichara. Ni Pagi Jacob Chimbagita, Jungun Korean, a dilichara. Naran out to Dutuna. Dindigi chapping on the Miller Pine, Yabjishia, Lewara. Ra, Penajacushin by Gishimba Mans in Garuda. I should call a diligent go home. Chirada, could chapping on the door, Ra, Maladilachi, and a Konzugi, Lumbadre, Junoya Poyana, Dilla Chawada, such a point in Yin, Olus Dutuna, and to Jacob the Cherry. Ra, Tikalana on the chapping on the Lewara. And Kashi Kuranza with Goti and Goti for the Kesha Mandini, the show let the Posha order, she Majagin that alone, the show the Gaimura. Siglet and young to the Kundula, Sigilera. The show Nico Pasha Jacob Tata so and the Diluna and Lyra, and the Pamaja, and then the lady, sometimes the Kondo liver, and sometimes chapping on the liver, the Canadian, somewhere in the leader.
And so likewise, we can think all of these things come from afflictions because, at the end of the day, we can see very many real-world examples of this, right? So if you have like one big country and they want to take control of a smaller country, right? Then, why do they do that? Is because, the person who's in charge, like the president or whatever, is thinking, if I can get that smaller country, I'll become famous, I'll become renowned, or maybe they have all sorts of riches or things that we want to get, and it'll benefit our own country and things like that. So all of this is coming due to the power of attachment, right? But likewise, sometimes the two heads of state and they meet and one says a nasty word, not necessarily, one says something to another and they don't like it, and then they get into kind of a tiff, and then because of that wars can start, right? So also because of anger, right? Things can go bad, right? So whenever these kind of situations arise, we can always kind of trace it back to these kind of these afflictions that are behind it.
Chitangen Zamidira, Chitangazogi, Mimawagi, Conjola Penny, Shudo, Kachina, Conjogi, and such a Nang, the Kenichura, the Nambaina Lele, Ra, Mazulegi, and such a Kuyu Penny Joyer, Ra, in a Nalo Midi. In dingy such a land, Sasandres, the Congress and the Passans, and another mixture, Kangisama. Dingy such a dingy, the Congress, the Chile, Kashi Kapore, Napore, the Living Mabu, Chitani, and the Ganzukangi, which is Zogora. The Ganzu, Naran surgery, Conjugal Mass surgery, Mare, Sacha, not Conzo, such a Conzugaji, and such a young Lagomara. In another Migi question or Jap. This such a departure to Condore, the Netting Anzore, the name of Zaluna, Maja, not to pardon a Maja in the land, the little Legora. There's some other things over it. Chitang missing in Zamliga and Tambo, and a Devaina, near Kazashiba, Zamiga and Drumbo Nashere, such a some other Drankana Shere. You know, to David in a Tamboche, some Tambotashin, Dig Maja, where the Tubasha, where the Shulu Michi dog on a Shego Yomara, Kuma Yomara, Misama Tambotashin. Parts of Shema where any Kibo, Cardana, the Langazo, Miduja, and Chalado in a Sosa Ponya, where the Kumakur, that in the leader. The Karan Miss Sugi, Kashi Church to Kashi Chunji, and Naran's Mix Sujura.
So of course there are different kind of religions in the world, and they might have different ways to explain certain things. But in terms of the Buddhist point of view, then we have this beautiful place, with a beautiful world around us, and it's really something quite amazing. And so, but actually, it is due to our own actions or due to our own creation of the mind that we create so much of the difficulties and the problems, right? Because we have this idea of this is my land, or this is my space, and this is your space, and I got to protect my space, and this and like that, and we divide things up like that. But it's not like there's, a God coming down and telling us this is your land, this is my land, and things like that. And it's not like the land itself is telling us this is this person's land and this person's land and things like that. But rather, all of those problems are being created by our own thinking, right? So, whereas on the other hand, if we really think about it, again, getting back to this analogy of us just being guests on this planet, and so the planet is our guest house in a way. And if we really kind of saw it like that and sought to take good care of it and seeing that these things come from our own mind, then we wouldn't really feel the need to, protect these things or, put circles around these things in such a way. And if really we were all able to do that, we would be very super happy and carefree, right? But it's only because the mind and the afflictions are creating all these different problems and divisions that makes people behave in certain ways, that then we have to protect our things and, take care and all that stuff.
다른 가서 진짜 저배 거라시데 지 군도다 미두자 거라시데 오르면서 미야보 에페 몸이라 잠이가 미야보 탕보 치치라로 가지 기사다 처리야 제도서 안 가서 잠이기 미창마 남이지 나시래도 파기라 아리도 지강이 되는 것은 나서 통도 제가 심바 가르지 먼저 남이지 나시 파기라 지 동에 주는 가서 취취로다 아니 가시지 변조로 바체로 근데야 야포체나 야포베 요르스라 다다가 저기 저배 가라시데 저바 칸데 고 두자들 저바 칸데 곰다시데 미두어 잔자 시데 오라 지다이네 아이 잠리가 미 야포다 타보다 오늘 전에 배 가시 야포요라 참아 두자마 참아요
So now we're kind of, our main topic is talking about patience, right? And so that leads us to talk about anger, and that leads us to talk about, all these angry people and horrible people doing horrible things. So it seems like we're focused so much on that. But actually there are lots of really, really nice and good people in the world, right? So we shouldn't kind of forget that. I mean, we see this everywhere, like, when, we kind of see this, that people have problems and other people come in to help them, and kind of like we're one big family in a certain way. So it's just because now our topic is patience, we end up talking about all these negative things, but it's not to forget that actually there's a lot of nice people out there.
I think sometimes we have a healthy understanding of the situation or the other person, so we are able to be patient. But sometimes we might get angry, and then we suppress the anger because we are not in control, and we suppress it, and I think usually it ends up like some sort of a trauma in the body, like a disease. So is there like a practice for purification specifically for that?
Che netan de hakone de lung langi mare gaso mi sempre della samchiche da netan de hakone lung langi mare in samson den mai impe an ganso de lung lang ne in antis kare mungu machea de kana nunpa kana slap gomne mache ngato de nunpa nun chigirwa an dene ngato de la zuppa ya la yang ne peut quel to girwa de
di controllare ma ci sono manenti controllo di scilla ma den sono nyadena sono tenen nulora
ne zuppa ne peut quel girwa an di kare masoya ya na daya ki chedu kare chigire
근데 다 거기 가서는 control department에서는 잠자 가시 이해 당아 됐으니 양모로 샤다죠 미지기 쓰지 나불러는 그 control에 나눈도 있다나 그래서 장마로 차고 전화를 리더 빌라보라
그래
이 미지기는 이따 투버셔 있나라 당아니도 투버셔나 평알 나고지라라 땡기기 뒤집어 곰되는 앞에 강에 태워라 선바 그래 띵에 파 전화를 발내로 자와이나 나테스 강에 뉴도 둘라오라
Mane de kare lemma gyaki wangi and ngatsu susula dindiki controlla de and ngatsu de
pena charanga lo controlla ra tangi charanga ne maje ngara de ra ngegi contro de ngara ma cha de gala ngara ngi thuden ka ngi thidu lo ra ngale ti ande ra ta susugi contro pa tenyo maru contro la de ra pa ngi charanga ba signa ko la yo maru ma sympathing na control la de control ma cha to yo mara ni na ani ko kangi te gora kese control di cha to ina ko simpa ma che de man ti ke mundu ti chen chun ju je resha ko la khaya mara le jin di karsa Nyomo Angi and the Chigre, and the control on the Chumudal, but some Samazana, can I can take Maristra. The Kangizomatuni, Tadu Narola, Palamatu, and this is a Narola, the Tadosana Mamatan, and he pay symbol Trinena, Nurisra. The Batamazana zone, the Kama, the Urlanira, so Simba Namaza, and the Sano Marconi. Simba Narola, not a hand or in the trigger, Samazan, then I said, Samazan is a natural gangating matters. Can I get pay lad in Yadiris? In a color hair martin and Yadia in some Digani, Tapach Dera, Gangi, higher the most Tapado, Diganing and Nassazor. The Samazan assertion and gangating.
Yes, so of course there's kind of a difference between like showing the anger and actually getting angry, right? So if the kind of we're saying with an example, like if someone says not something nasty to you and you get angry, but you think not to show it, right? So then you're just kind of holding it in, and then that definitely is going to have negative effects on you. But then the point is really to understand this difference between. So it's not just about not showing the anger, but it's about actually overcoming our anger and working with the anger itself, right? Such that we kind of are able to overcome it and not actually get angry in the first place, right? So it's kind of like the anger being kept inside is kind of like a dirty pan, right? And if we have the pan stays dirty, it's going to cause us all sorts of problems with our health and so forth. Whereas we're trying with these meditations, this way of thinking about the advantages of anger, the advantages of patience, the disadvantages of anger, and thinking about the ways to deal with it, we're trying to clean that pan. Right? We're trying to clean the mind from the anger such that we don't kind of respond in that way in the first place, not just externally, but also within the mind.
That's not cheating to Kanyedo, control that I the person, Samazo, the cheating current, Gonda led the bear, me simple Gonda lecture, sick Cambujere, sick, just Gonda ra. Net sickere, the Pagi, Midi Kurushu and Gonda, and never cheddar. Gonda led, Tujiche, only Beabuda, Tichiche, and then the Chidi and in Zamzan control the Lawaina, Ninja Tobas and Madiwachera, Penachunga Contos and Natural Contos and Ani Baru Tobajo, Taujura. The Topa and Ani Karen, Ani too, Kishishi, Chichen thing and misunderstanding, Norni, and the Luna Hajura, Chichen and Samazo, Chiniparula, Dioma de Carsota, Chen Dujayomare, in Zamza Conutin. Kecha konete wa ina sana tanda no ina mishimagi chola chik dati na no ina ra chugi mala na la son ro chila mishimagi la ina otu di konete wora zamza dile yungurti kani mini kunla ina kuni tu ni kecha hoshi ebe kecham cho dile la do di karenge dile la medas na ni chama chaya ale ko la mdela yama chara chi zamza susu no tu di kele ne gonda la ide ra 그래서 하야도 타와이나 이제 점점 뜨고요. 또나씩 뭐 짱마 써야 돼. 건달라야다. 아니 나도 세히치니라. 세히라는 파츠 강이데 가르르도. 그런 노트도 이게 노르르다. 아니 버르라마 misunderstand 간다스 차도 따야 돼 비키치마다. 이게 짱마 써도. 근데 심벌냐 되든 아니 뭐네 나서서. 되냐.
So then, most of these times, like if someone gets angry with another person, then a lot of the time that arises due to some kind of a misunderstanding, right? So the best way to deal with that really is to get together and clearly communicate about what happened, right? Because there's some kind of misunderstanding, and if we're able to clarify that by saying, "Oh, I may have said this, but I didn't mean it like that, and it's like this, and what did you mean when you said this?" and really clearly communicating and trying to get to some kind of understanding, then we can really see what went wrong. And then if you see that I made a mistake, then the best way to get over that is to say sorry, right? And in other contexts, it might be to say thank you or to say whatever, right? To be able to alleviate that misunderstanding that led to getting angry with each other. And so in that way, again, we're kind of cleaning the pan in that kind of way. Oh, yeah. So we leave it here for today.